And so, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration and the Senate now proceed to H.R. 1044. Further, that the Lee Amendment at the desk be agreed to, that the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
The Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I thank the Senator from Utah for his response to my proposal. My staff received his amendment yesterday. We quickly reviewed the language, and I'd like to share my reactions. Senator Lee does not include my language to protect children of immigrant workers from aging out during the delay in early filing because of objections from his side of the aisle. I am disappointed. Senator Lee's amendment would modify my proposal, allowing for immediate implementation of the 50-50 rule, excuse me, so the rule would go into effect after 180 days. Senator Lee would also provide that current H-1B employees may continue to change employers. The purpose of my 50-50 provision is to prevent outsourcing companies from continuing to exploit the H-1B visa program by hiring new H-1B employees. Senator Lee's language would not allow these companies to import new H-1B workers to exploit, so that is not objectionable to me. Senator Lee's amendment also accepts my proposal to delay by 1 year the bill's section changing the distribution of green cards to allow processing time for pending applications. To sum it up, the amendment currently being considered, for which unanimous consent has been asked, includes several key provisions I've advocated for that were not in Senator Lee's original bill, including early filing to protect immigrant workers and their families stuck in the backlog, an annual green card set aside for immigrant workers who are ineligible for early filing because they're overseas, a 1-year delay in Section 2 of the bill to protect immigrant workers with pending green card applications, and the 50-50 rule to protect American jobs and workers and to prevent the exploitation of immigrant workers that help create the green card backlog. Therefore, I'm prepared to accept this amendment in the spirit of bipartisan compromise. I will not object to Senator Lee's request.
Mr. President.
Is there objection? The Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. I clearly appreciate the hard work my colleagues have put in this measure. Florida is an immigration state, and we value our diversity. We also need to fix our immigration system so it makes sense. That starts with securing our borders. I've heard from many of my constituents about this bill because it impacts so many people in my state, including those who came to Florida from Latin America. We also have to help those who are escaping Communist China crackdown on freedoms in Taiwan and Hong Kong. So today I want to offer an amendment to make sure we are not creating an unfair system that favors certain nations that would disadvantage immigrants that do not happen to be from the nations that are the largest drivers of the employment-based visa backlog that we see today. I know my colleagues share my desire to preserve the diversity of our nation, and I look forward to them accepting my amendment today. Therefore, I ask that the Senator from Utah modify his request to include my amendment to the Lee Amendment at the desk. The amendment be considered and agreed to. The Lee Amendment as amended be agreed to. The bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed. And the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Does the Senator from Utah so modify his request?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. Senator Scott's proposed amendment would, to be clear, create a carve-out for people based on the language that they speak. Now, to be very clear, unless their language skills are somehow part of the analysis, determining whether or not they qualify for an employment-based immigrant visa, I do not see that making a carve-out for particular languages would be consistent with our immigration goals or with principles of fairness or of equity. Amendments that, like this one, purport to carve out groups of people based on their nationality or their ethnicity or native languages are antithetical to the type of equitable change that we've been pursuing with this bill for years. And so when we look at this, it operates quite broadly. It's trying to create a carve-out for people who are native speakers of Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Cantonese, Taiwanese, Hokkien, or Hakka, or who have attained a master's degree or higher in the aforementioned languages, or people who are spouses or children of people in the aforementioned list. That's a lot of people who have been identified there. Interestingly enough, this doesn't include other languages, and I haven't heard any principled basis upon which we could differentiate between those two. So it seems to me that in fixing one problem, if we reinsert this amendment in there, giving preferential treatment to people who, by the way, are not speakers of Hindi or of Urdu or of other languages commonly spoken in India, I don't understand the principled distinction between these language speakers and others. But more fundamentally, Mr. President, this undermines and contravenes the fundamental purpose of this legislation, which is to say that regardless of what other factors you might take into account, when deciding how you're going to allocate employment-based green cards, the one thing that we shouldn't look to, and that no longer makes any sense to look to the extent it ever made sense to beginning to look to, which it probably didn't, is the country of origin. This makes no sense, and it's wrong. And I therefore cannot support the amendment offered by my colleague, Senator Scott, and object to its adoption.
Is there objection to the
Mr.
original
President?
request? Senator from Florida.
Reserving the right to object. Clearly, I'm disappointed. My colleague is unwilling to accept my amendment. My goal is to be fair to the many wonderful and skilled people that want to build a life in our great country. I've also spoken to the White House about the bill, and they agreed we need more time to review the proposal and understand its impact on our immigration system. I hope my colleagues want to continue to work together. I hope we can find a path forward to address the current visa backlog. Therefore, I respectfully object.
Mr. President?
Objection is heard. The senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I'd go back to the question I asked rhetorically a moment ago. What is it about speakers of these languages mentioned in the amendment offered by my friend and distinguished colleague, the junior senator from Florida, that is, to native speakers or speakers who hold a degree in the languages of Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Cantonese, Taiwanese, Hokkien, or Hakka? What is it about speakers of those languages that makes them more deserving of an allocation of an employment-based immigrant visa than speakers of Hindi, of Urdu, or of any of the languages spoken in India? As I mentioned a moment ago, you've got a real problem, a real inequity. Overwhelmingly, the per-country cap punishes would-be immigrants from India in a way that doesn't affect any others, except maybe some from China. And by the way, he covers some of the language groups spoken in and around China, including Cantonese and including Taiwanese. So why not Mandarin? And if Mandarin, why not any of the languages spoken in India? This cuts right to the heart, Mr. President, of why it is that we need this reform and why it is we've got an Elvis Presley era, outdated, outmoded, unwise, and fundamentally inequitable immigration code, one that is at odds with the way our immigration system works. So if you imagine two otherwise identical applicants for a visa, they are exactly the same in all respects, in their academic degrees that they've earned, in their employment experience, in their background check, in their family status, their earning potential, their job commitment, professional certifications. They are identical in every single respect except for one. Immigrant A happens to hail from Sweden. Immigrant B happens to have been born in India. Immigrant A will be eligible to have an employment-based immigrant visa application considered immediately. Immigrant B, simply by virtue of having come from India, will in many circumstances have to be on a waiting list for 200 years. This is wrong. I really would like one day for someone, anyone, to explain to me why it makes any sense to leave this law on the books. They can't. They won't, because there is no good reason for doing so. And if they can't, and if they won't, why on earth would you want to weaken something and dilute something to create special privileges to one group of would-be employment-based green card holders, simply because they happen to come from yet another preferred country over the non-preferred, discriminated against country? This is wrong. We've got to get this thing passed. I'm so grateful to Dick Durbin and the work that he's done with me on this. I'm grateful to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have put together this bipartisan bill. I believe we're close. I believe we're very close. I intend and plan and fully commit in the coming days. I'm going to keep pushing this. This issue isn't going away. We're going to get this thing passed. Thank you, Mr. President.
President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I'm disappointed after all of these months of negotiation, emotion, intensity, and the feelings that we share for the people who are caught in this backlog. It is a real disappointment that at the last moment, the senator from Florida exercised his right as a senator to object to our unanimous consent request, a request which I was prepared to accept. May I suggest this is an illustration of the bottom line that I raised in my statement. Stuck with 140,000 limit on the green cards for employment visas and country caps for that 140,000 limit, we will continue to run into the problem illustrated by the senator from Florida. There will be those who want to create an exception to the overall quota or the country caps, and there will be compelling personal and family reasons for them to ask for it. And time and again, they'll find that if they get a privilege, it will be at the expense of someone else, and there'll be an objection. The only rational answer is to raise the cap on the green card quotas. 140,000 employment-based visas a year might have made sense 30 or 40 years ago. It makes no sense today in the world that we live in. We are talking about people in the United States working, who are trying to make a life here of a more permanent nature. They love this country enough to want to bring their families here, to relocate and live. They're working here and contributing in the computer industry and healthcare and so many different areas. They're valuable and important to the future of America. I sincerely hope that we can resolve the issue that was brought up on the floor today. But equally important, if not more important, I hope that we will have the will on a bipartisan basis to tackle a comprehensive immigration reform. We did it 7 years ago. We passed it 7 years ago. It can be done with senators of good faith and goodwill who work together. But it means that you have to accept the premise that there may be one additional new immigrant coming to America. Some people cannot stomach that, and they object to any efforts to change immigration laws that might result in an additional immigrant. This son of an immigrant, who happens to be a United States Senator, believes that immigration defines this country. Our diversity defines this country. And bringing people here who are willing to sacrifice and risk everything to be part of America's future is part of the reason why we have prospered as a nation. I hope that senators at both sides of the aisle will have the good sense to come to that conclusion, and that at another time with another Congress and perhaps another president, we can have a meaningful and fair-minded conversation. In the meantime, I will work with Senator Lee to resolve the differences that we have, which are now down to only a handful. I believe we have made dramatic progress as evidenced today. We're disappointed by the result, but we are not giving up. I yield the floor.